Good evening, everyone. My name is Zsofia, and I work right here at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, here in the political section. I've worked here for about 6 or 7 months now, and while I'd be happy to tell you about my job, I'm going to talk about something completely different tonight. Before I was a diplomat, I studied dance for much of my life. And I'd like to talk to you about performing arts in the United States and how my experiences fit into the larger scheme of how people study performing arts in the US, how people consume performing arts, and what kind of careers there are in the performing arts. So I'll start by talking about my background, specifically in ballet, and how I transitioned from actually studying ballet to studying dance history and dance criticism as academic subjects, and then actually writing for newspapers as both a dance and a classical music critic. And then I'll talk about how I use that background in order to help me become a diplomat and help me become more effective at my job. And then I'll talk a little bit about generally performing arts in the United States and how that differs from performing arts in Russia, which I'm always happy to experience here. If at any point in time you have questions, please go ahead and ask, and my colleagues will make sure that they get to me so I can answer them. So let me start by talking about my background as a dancer. So I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is a state in the Midwest, a beautiful state with 10,000 lakes, forests, cold in the winter, similar to northern Russia. So as a child, I started studying ballet. Now, that's the main difference between how the United States approaches kind of training in performing arts and how Russia approaches training in performing arts, because in the US, if you want to take a dance class as a child or as an adult, basically you just pay for it, or your parents pay for it. Unless you're trying to get into one of the really top elite schools, you don't have to audition, you don't have to prove that you're good, because really classes are for everyone. And you don't have to become a professional dancer just to enjoy dance, just to enjoy the health benefits, the mental benefits, the artistic benefits. So whereas in Russia, still for a lot, in order to get into a dance school as a child, you have to audition and you have to be good enough. So I started studying ballet at a school called St. Paul City Ballet. It was attached to a small company, the St. Paul City Ballet Company. It was a small school with some really great teachers who'd had careers in dance, but it wasn't really kind of the elite school that went on to train the dancers who would become professional. If you showed a lot of talent and you were really good enough, then they would encourage you to audition for one of the schools in, for example, New York City or Miami or Los Angeles or Seattle. Some of the really top schools in the country, or Chicago as well has one of the best schools. So, but that wasn't really my intention, and I'll be honest with you, I loved ballet, but I didn't have the talent to become a professional dancer because it is such a competitive industry. So as a child, I studied ballet at St. Paul City Ballet. We had the opportunity to perform in a number of performances where the teachers would choreograph pieces or guest choreographers would come in, and we would perform at smaller theaters to paying audiences, of course, but really it was more for the community, not so much for the world. Although these days, I'm sure they film them and post them online so everyone can see them. Ballet is something that I was very passionate about and that I loved studying, even though it was pretty clear from the beginning I didn't have the natural talent to become a professional. It's amazing physical exercise, first of all. It's really great mental exercise, and it really teaches you an appreciation for art, for music. So I think it's something that all children should be exposed to, and if they're not, adults can be exposed to it. Most ballet studios in the United States offer classes for adults from beginning all the way to semi-professional. So if you never had the chance to study as a child, you could always study as an adult. Now, I was very passionate about it, and one of the things that I considered when I was in high school and getting ready to graduate at around age 18 was going to a university with a dance department. I think that is also something that's unique to the United States that I haven't seen in Russia, because around 18 is when you're supposed to turn professional if you are going to be a professional dancer. But if you want to pursue more of your education and you're not really looking at a professional career at a top tier ballet company, what you can go and do is audition for a dance department and major in dance. That means you're still taking dance classes, you're still performing, but you're also studying the history of dance. You're studying dance criticism, you're studying teaching, how to teach dance, how to choreograph. And when you graduate with a degree, you probably won't go on to have a performing arts career unless you go to one of the really top programs. But what you can do is continue as a scholar, continue as a teacher, maybe run a dance company. So there are a lot of different options. And many universities in the United States have dance departments, and they do offer dance majors. So since I grew up in Minnesota, the biggest university there is the University of Minnesota, and it did have an excellent dance department. In fact, while I was still in school, in high school, I had the opportunity to take classes at the University of Minnesota in dance, both in physical and learning dance, as well as a history of dance class, which was fantastic. It's amazing to be able to physically dance and participate in performing arts, but it's also really important to know the history. So I had that opportunity, and I considered going to the University of Minnesota and studying dance maybe as a major, which is, you know, what you really get your degree in, or as a minor, which is kind of a secondary area in which you get a degree in. But I decided not to go that route, partly because working in the performing arts, especially if you're not performing, it's a hard career. That's also a difference that we see between the US and Russia. Not that it's not a hard career in Russia, because it is, but because the arts aren't state funded in the United States, which means all companies, which means all arts organizations constantly have to raise funds from the private sector. And it depends, their survival really depends on whether or not they can raise these funds. So instead of deciding to go and study dance at university, I went off to study international relations and diplomacy. At my university, I went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. But I maintained that passion for dance, and how I was able to transform my background in it was by becoming a dance critic. So what I did is my university student newspaper had some arts criticism, not a lot of dance criticism, but you know, every September when there are new students, they ask if people are interested in student journalism. You can go and sign up and talk to editors and talk about what you're interested in. And I said, I want to write about dance. So they were like, sure, we don't have anyone else doing that. It was kind of a low bar. It wasn't exactly that I had to compete for a job or anything like that. And to be honest, I really didn't know what I was doing at first. I read a lot of dance criticism. So major newspapers in the US still have dance critics, although a lot of it has transitioned online to bloggers and to people doing dance criticism without necessarily being attached to newspaper. But this was back in the early 2000s, and dance criticism was still mainly print criticism and print journalism. So I read a lot of dance criticism, and I said, sure, I can do this. I can go out and watch performances and write about them. That sounds fantastic. So because I was in Washington, D.C., which had a lot of different dance companies coming through, including a home company, the Washington Ballet, I went to a lot of performances. My editor called up a theater and offered to have me come and review in exchange for free tickets. And I went, and I saw the performances, and I wrote reviews. So while I wasn't paid, because this was a student newspaper, I got free tickets, which as a dance lover is really all that I could ask for. So all through university, I wrote dance criticism. I started with dance criticism, mainly focusing on ballet, but also doing a lot of modern dance as I got a little bit more comfortable with my writing style, as I developed a writing style and really got comfortable with what I was doing. All this time, I was still taking classes. The Washington Ballet has a fantastic school attached to it that was not far from my university, so I was still taking a couple classes a week, sometimes with the professional dancers because they would come and take the adult classes. And then I was writing quite a bit about dance, so I was pretty busy, but it's really what I wanted to do. Now, my second year at university, early on, my editor called me into his office, and he said, "So, you know about ballet, you write about dance. Dance has music, dance has classical music, so you must know about music, so you must know how to write about opera." Basically, the Washington National Opera, which is the home opera company in Washington, D.C., had offered tickets to the opening night performance for that season, and he was looking for someone who wanted to go and review it and knew something about it. I had never seen an opera before, but I didn't want to let the chance go by, so I said, sure, I'll go and watch it. And since I always got 2 tickets, I always got to take a guest. I asked my roommate, who is my really good friend, if she wanted to come to the opera with me, and she said, yes. And then my editor called me and said, you do know that it is opening night. It's a gala performance. You have to dress up. It's, floor-length gowns, evening gowns. Neither my roommate nor I had evening gowns, but we didn't want to let the opportunity go by, so we went shopping, and then we went to the performance, which was fantastic. It was actually an operetta performance. It ended up being Die Fledermaus by Strauss. So it was a really great first opera to see because it wasn't something serious. It was something very light, operetta, sparkling, and I just fell in love with it. I did my best to review it. I had never sung before myself, but that was a little bit hard to really know how to write about critically, but it was a performance, it was a theater, and I knew music, so I was able to write about it. And then my editor just kept asking me if I wanted to go see more and more operas, which I did. So I started actually studying opera as well. Not singing, because I cannot sing at all. But I took a class that my university offered on the history of opera and on kind of music criticism. That was very helpful. So I did this all through university, and actually my last year, what I ended up doing was getting an internship at the Washington National Opera because I was so passionate about it. I worked in their fundraising department, which was great. Placido Domingo was running the Washington National Opera at the time, and it was really great to work for him and get that experience. At which point I didn't do criticism because it would have been a conflict of interest, but I still continued with dance criticism. After that, I had the opportunity to move to Moscow and spend a year studying here, and then I ended up staying and working for a company here. Nothing to do with opera or with dance, but I got to know some of the journalists who worked at the Moscow Times, and including the arts editor at the time. This was back when it was still a daily print publication. And he had read some of my work that I had done earlier, dance and opera criticism, and asked if I wanted to write for the Moscow Times. I said I would love to. It was not a paid position, but again, I got tickets. So it was a really great experience to be able to do that. I didn't go too often because I had a day job, but I was very happy when I could go. So I was able to use some of my background in dance to write criticism, not only for a student newspaper, but then actually for a real newspaper, not just about ballet and modern dance, but then also branching into opera and classical music, including classical music concerts. So that's one career that if you're interested in the performing arts, you can follow. It's not an extremely stable career. If you're a critic, you have to freelance a lot because only a couple newspapers still have like full-time dance critics or even music critics on staff. But it's something that you do out of love, out of passion. But that came to an end, and then I joined the State Department as a diplomat. And I was very happy to do that, but it seemed like I was kind of leaving some of my performing arts career behind. I was really, even along the way, I was, even after I had decided not to go to university with the dance department, I was still thinking, well, maybe I could still end up doing it as a career. I read a lot of dance history books, and I met a lot of the scholars in the US who worked in these areas. And I even considered at one point, maybe going back to school and doing a PhD in dance history. Decided not to do that, went the diplomacy route. But fortunately, my first assignment was right here in Moscow. This is back in 2010 to 12. So that was the first assignment that I had as a diplomat, and I worked in the public affairs section. And it was a really great time to be here because we were able to sponsor, or at least co-sponsor, a lot of American artists who came to Russia. And that included dance companies and classical music companies. So I remember when I was here back in 2012, we brought the Chicago Symphony Orchestra here to Moscow. We brought the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, based in New York City. It's a modern dance company here to Moscow. And we brought smaller companies here. So I was able to use that expertise that I had developed not just as a dancer, but then as a critic to do my job here well, and to really look at what kind of dancers, what kind of artists, what kind of performing artists would resonate with people here in Moscow, what kind of people, how we could forge people-to-people connections based on that, and how I could be better at my job as a diplomat based on my own background in dance and in music. So I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. And then, of course, being here in Moscow, there are so many theaters, so many different. You could see a performance every night and still not see everything. Well, far from it, of course. So I was very happy to be able to do that. Afterwards, I was posted to a couple of different countries, much less artistic, much less performing arts inclined. But I spent the last year back in the U.S. in the Washington, D.C. area, and was able to go to a lot of performances there. So I still keep up my interest in the dance world, especially dance, but also opera. I have friends who are actually professional dancers, or actually more so than that, I have friends who work in arts management, so who work for a company or a theater, whether that's in marketing or fundraising or one of those management responsibilities, which is something I always considered as a career and ultimately didn't end up doing, partly because it is so unstable and you don't know if you'll have the money to do it. But it's one thing, one kind of career that you could pursue. So if you have a passion for performing arts, especially dance and music, which is my background, there are many different ways you can pursue that passion. There are different jobs you can have in the industries, but you can also use that knowledge and that passion to do whatever you end up doing and to weave that into your job. I still take ballet classes. Now, I haven't taken any recently, just because I've been busy, and to be honest, I haven't taken any since I moved to Moscow, but I know there are ones that I could take here. I do go to performances, not when the theaters are closed, but once they open back up again. Fortunately, I caught an opera just about a week and a half ago before the Bolshoi had to shut down temporarily. And I still, that will always be a part of my life and something that I feel really helps in all areas. So that was not a very exhaustive history of performing arts in the United States, but it is kind of a personal story of how performing arts have impacted my life and continue to impact my life. And I think I'll stop talking there. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or to go into more details or try to give advice from any perspective that I have. If you don't have questions, I can tell some more stories about experiences I had.
Yeah, there's a question. So what makes performing arts in the US unique as compared to those in Russia and other countries with established performance traditions?
What makes performing arts in the United States unique as opposed to Russia or other countries with established performing arts traditions? I'll just stick to Russia and the United States because every country is unique. I don't want to say that all European countries have the same traditions because they don't. But let's stick to Russia and the United States. So I think there are many different ways to approach this question, but I'll go back to a point that I made earlier. It's really a different industry and a different funding mechanism that I think is really fundamental to how performing arts works in the United States. In the United States, we don't have state-funded performing arts. There are some government grants that you can apply to support a specific opera or theater performance that you want to do. But other than that, every performing arts organization has to raise money from the private sector. Now, ticket sales for performances typically only cover about 30 to 40% of the budget every year, which means the majority of the budget has to come from fundraising. Now, a lot of that is just going out and asking people for money. Big companies can give big donations, but the vast majority of the donations are from individuals who give maybe $50, $100, but you have to find a lot of those individuals. So it's really that funding mechanism that makes it an unstable industry, I have to say, because companies, performing arts organizations never know how much money they'll have and what they'll need to do. And unfortunately, this is an especially difficult time as performances have had to shut down for the next couple weeks. Now in Russia, and in most of Europe, but let's stick to Russia, there is state funding for the performing arts. There is also a lot of private sector fundraising. I've noticed that over the years that a lot of the companies have shifted to that and are also using some of that model, but it's still more stable to have the really big state-supported companies. But I think in the US, because you don't have that, you have a little bit more flexibility. And there are a lot of really small performing arts organizations that have small budgets and they can do whatever they want, but it's really decentralized and they can be, really creative in serving the needs of that particular small community. So I don't want to say one is better than the other. One is definitely more stable. But also, as we all know, the history of performing arts in the United States is just a lot shorter because the history of the United States is a lot shorter. So a lot of what we see on stage today in the US really comes from the 20th century because there isn't much, to be honest, before that. Some a little bit, but not that much. So we see a lot of native performing arts in the United States, whether you want to talk about American opera, whether you want to talk about jazz, whether you want to talk about the American style of ballet, which was established by, originally a Georgian from Russia, George Balanchine, who came and founded the American School of Ballet and really created what is known as the American style of ballet. But a lot of that, so all of this only dates back to the 20th century. So it's a lot younger and a lot less well established, I guess I would say, from that perspective. But that makes for it's a different styles, different traditions, and the more we can see more of one, and the more we can see from all, the richer we'll be, because it's important to know the more traditional perspectives, but also see what's going on creatively in the 20th, 21st century.
All right, and the next question is, what is your favorite ballet of all time?
My favorite ballet of all time. That's a hard one. That's a hard one to answer because, you have to talk about whether you want to talk about classical ballet or 20th century or 21st century. But I will say I will say probably my favorite, and this is not a full-length ballet, it's only about half an hour, 40-minute ballet, is Serenade by George Balanchine to the music of Tchaikovsky. It was the first ballet that he choreographed for students at the School of American Ballet in the 1930s once he immigrated to the United States, to New York City. And it is simplistic, because it was meant to be a vehicle to teach the students, but it is so incredibly beautiful, and the musicality of it just makes you realize how special the choreographer was. We'll have to take a little bit of a break because we have an announcement. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Yes, so I love Serenade by George Balanchine. It's probably, I'd say, my favorite ballet of all time.
All right. Another comment from Olga Sukharova. Dear Zsofia, thank you so much for the story. When you see performers, do you see yourself performing or more of a critic? What do you feel? Regret or relief not pursuing that career?
When I see performers, do I see myself or do I approach it as more of a critic, and do I feel a regret? So I'll say that I'll be honest, it has changed over time. So when I was in my early 20s, I'm 36 now, so like 15 years ago, I felt regret and a burning desire to be the one who was on stage because I loved it so much and I worked hard. I knew that I wasn't, naturally gifted enough to be a dancer. I probably also didn't work as hard as I would have needed to, but that's what I wanted to do. If I could, have any wish in life, I would have wanted to be a dancer up on stage. Now that I've been older, I see a lot, and I have friends who are in the dance world, whether as dancers or again in arts management. I feel less regret because it is a really hard life, and while it is amazing when you're in your early 20s, it gets harder as the career progresses. It gets harder on your body. It gets hard, especially if you're in a company where you don't know what your future will be. You might be very talented and join a great company when you're 18, but maybe you're not progressing through your career, and then you realize that everyone else is progressing and you're not. And so it's a hard life. I think I'm happy where I am now, and I don't feel regret the same way that I did 15 years ago. And when I look on stage, yes, sometimes, if it's choreography that I have learned before, then I do think about it. I do think about dancing it. But a lot of that has faded from my memory, to be honest. A lot of the choreography has faded, so I definitely don't know the choreography anymore. And I look at it more as a critic rather than as someone who does it myself, because I think just because of that time that has passed. But I still love to go to performances, and especially seeing kind of the variety of dance that is out there now. I love seeing modern dance. I love seeing postmodern dance. Ballet is still my favorite, but I love to see a lot of the contemporary choreography as well, and really seeing kind of the innovative things that are going on right now. And I did not, what I left out of my story is back when I was in university, I also dabbled a little bit in choreography. Our theater program in university put on a couple of musicals that I choreographed. So these were definitely not professional dancers. They were fairly good singers. They weren't professional though. So it was fun working with them because you're not doing anything amazing, but you're really trying to capture some of the story through the steps, through the choreography. So sometimes I think about, well, it would be great to be a choreographer, but it's also hard, and I probably wouldn't have come up with anything as good as what I see on stage now.
Another question. As a critic, what things about a dance performance do you judge? What should the viewers pay attention to in a performance to understand that it's a good performance?
What should the viewers pay attention to understand that it's a good performance, and what do I as a critic judge? That's a good question because different people have different approaches. I think it's interesting to see what a critic's background is because, as I mentioned, I wrote both ballet and opera criticism and a couple of other things, but mainly those two. And I had a background in ballet. I did not have a background in opera. So one I could judge from kind of the more technical aspect. The other, yes, if you know they sang the wrong note, that I would notice, but I never knew what it was like to be up on stage in their shoes. And I think I took a different approach. And critics who have a background in dance, if that's what they're reviewing, might take a slightly different approach than critics who don't. And I'm not saying you absolutely need to have that background, but it definitely helps. It at least makes you a little more aware of the technical part. But then other people will say, you know, sometimes the technique, the perfect technique, is not what makes a great performance. I do want to emphasize that dance is telling a story, even if it's a contemporary piece, even if it's, you know, one of Balanchine's black and white leotard ballets. Dance is always telling a story. So it's not just about the steps, it's about the expression and the music and how, and that story might be abstract, but it has to kind of come together and speak to you. So when I'm writing criticism, which to be honest I haven't done in a while, I always have a notepad and I have a pen. And now it's dark, but I'm writing. When I write, and then I pretty much I can decipher my handwriting afterwards. But I'm taking notes, and I will take notes on mainly on moments that really come together when a dancer really captures the feelings, the music, and what happens. I know that's a little hard to describe, so I wish I had some videos next time. Next time I'll have to do that of some of my favorite moments. I think I love a great artist who's a great technician in that they do amazing things that take your breath away, whether that's, you know, perfect 32 fouettes in Swan Lake, or whether that's, you know, those perfect 9 high C's in La Fille du Régiment that the tenor sings. That's incredible because because it's not something that most people can do. It's not something it's something that very few people can do, and it takes your breath away to see how incredible that is. So sometimes some of those technical pieces really come together. But overall, so when I sit down to write a review, you have to review the main performers. So, you know, whether that's a ballet, the principal dancers, if it's an opera, of course, the main singers, you have to pay attention to them, because if they're weak, then, well, that you know, kind of drags down the entire performance. And when you're writing, you have to write about them. So yes, you do start by looking at the big things, looking at the main characters, the main dancers, the main singers, and how they interact, you judge them on kind of the technical basis, but also how they're telling the story, and how they interact with one another is also very important, and how kind of it all fits together, because sometimes you get the feeling, and I've gotten the feeling in performances, that the, you know, star, whether that's the male or the female star, usually for more classical performances, you'll have a man and a woman who are the main roles. Sometimes they're great by themselves, but they don't have a lot of chemistry and they don't interact well together, and that kind of that also takes away from it. So you want to see how they interact with each other, how the whole thing comes together. So I'm not sure that's a very good answer because it's hard to say. But I definitely recommend reading a lot of dance criticism, and especially it's interesting to go to performance and then read a review of it later. I never read reviews of performances that I was reviewing until I was already done, because I didn't want to be biased and know what other people were saying. But it is fascinating to see, and sometimes you won't agree. You just won't. It is a subjective thing that you're doing.
And the last question is, have you ever seen Frances Ha movie? If you have, is it close to real life and performing arts?
Have I ever seen which movie?
Frances Ha, H-A.
Frances Ha?
Yeah.
I have not seen that movie.
What about the Black Swan then?
I have seen the Black Swan. It isn't real life. It's great. I enjoyed it, and I think artistically it's a great kind of very dark story, but it's not, I would say, not being a professional dancer, but having spent some time in that, adjacent to that world, it's not a good representation. But sometimes I think it's a great piece of art. My favorite dance movie, I have a lot of favorite dance movies actually, so I can't say it's my favorite. There are some really great dance movies out there. One of the classics, and I'd love to hear what Russians think about this, but is White Nights, which stars Mikhail Baryshnikov and Gregory Hines, who is a great tap dancer. Definitely love that movie. It's set in Leningrad in the 1980s, but it wasn't actually filmed there because they didn't have permission to film there. But it's great, love it. And then I'd say my very favorite dance movie of all time is called Center Stage. It came out in the year 2000. It stars real dancers from mainly from American Ballet Theater in New York, and it's more or less, actually more, if you're talking about realism, it's more or less realistic. It's, these are dancers who are graduating from their dance school and trying to get into a company. So there's some competition, but there's a lot of camaraderie as well, and I think that's kind of the most realistic portrayal. But it's great that the dance is incorporated into a lot of movies, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do, with the camera that makes it a different medium. So it's not the same, obviously, as going to see a performance, but there are also a lot of different things that you can do creatively when you incorporate it into a movie. All right. Well, it's been great being here. I look forward to coming back and talking about more topics. I have a lot of interests. And thank you all very much for watching. Please make sure to follow the American Center on all of our social media, including the website amc.ru. There will be a lot more digital content coming, so stay tuned and take a look at some of the other lectures that are coming up, and make sure you let us know what your interests are. What do you want to hear more about, and we'll try to accommodate.